The massive space station Concordia Prime floated in the darkness like a silver city among the stars. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window of the human diplomatic shuttle and watched the enormous structure grow larger as they approached. The station was home to the Galactic Assembly, where representatives from 47 different species met to discuss trade, politics, and the future of the galaxy. Jake had been Earth's ambassador for 3 years now, but he still felt nervous before these meetings. Today would be different, though. Today he planned to ask questions that nobody wanted to answer. The shuttle pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ambassador Morrison, we're getting clearance to dock now. Security is asking about our weapons again." Jake sighed and looked at Lisa Carter, his security chief. She was staring out another window with a frustrated expression on her face. Lisa had been a soldier before becoming a diplomat's bodyguard, and the weapon restrictions bothered her more than anyone else on the team. "Tell them what we always tell them," Jake said to the pilot. "No weapons aboard. All scanning equipment available for inspection." Lisa turned away from the window. "It's not right, Jake. Look at that Zephyrian ship docking next to us. I can see their plasma rifles from here. They call them cultural artifacts, but everyone knows they're weapons." Jake nodded. He had seen this many times before. Every other species in the galaxy was allowed to bring their traditional weapons to the assembly. The Korthak wore bioweapons built into their exoskeletons. The Draconis carried energy swords that could cut through steel. The Altarians brought small defensive shields that could stop bullets. Only humans had to arrive completely defenseless. The shuttle shook slightly as it connected to the docking bay. Jake gathered his papers and prepared to face the security screening that awaited every human delegation. It was always the same routine: full body scans, blood tests, psychological evaluations, and constant monitoring during their stay. Commander Alex Rivera met them at the shuttle door. He was the captain of the human diplomatic vessel New Horizon and had been making these trips for longer than anyone. His weathered face showed the strain of dealing with galactic politics for so many years. "How was the trip from Earth?" Rivera asked as they walked toward the security checkpoint. "Long," Jake replied. "Any word on why they called this emergency session?" Rivera shook his head. "The usual. Border disputes, trade disagreements, and something about resource allocation in the Outer Rim. Nothing that directly affects us, but we're required to attend anyway." They reached the security station where a tall, insect-like Zephyrian officer waited with scanning equipment. The creature's multiple eyes focused on Jake as he approached. "Ambassador Morrison," the officer said in heavily accented English, "please submit to standard security procedures." Jake stepped into the scanning chamber and waited as blue light washed over his body. The machine beeped and hummed for several minutes before the Zephyrian nodded. "You are cleared for entry. Your monitoring bracelet will be activated shortly." Jake looked down at his wrist as a small metal band materialized around it. The bracelet would track his location and vital signs for the entire duration of his stay. No other species had to wear them. Lisa went through the same process, but Jake could see the anger building in her eyes. When she emerged from the scanner, she walked straight to the Zephyrian officer. "I have a question," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Why do humans require special monitoring when other species don't?" The officer's antennae twitched. "Galactic security protocols. All species have different requirements based on their classification." "What classification?" Lisa pressed. "That information is not available to unauthorized personnel." Jake put a hand on Lisa's shoulder before she could respond. He had learned that arguing with security officers was pointless. The real decisions were made by politicians, not guards. They collected their belongings and headed toward the diplomatic quarters. The station's main corridor was bustling with activity as delegates from dozens of worlds prepared for the assembly session. Jake recognized most of the species, but there were always a few new faces at these meetings. Near the Altarian delegation, Jake spotted Ambassador Zektar of the Hegemony Coalition. The elderly alien had been attending these meetings for over 30 years and was one of the few beings who would speak honestly with human representatives. "Ambassador Morrison," Zektar called out as Jake approached. "I was hoping to see you here." "Hello, old friend," Jake replied. "I'm surprised they called an emergency session. Usually we have more warning." Zektar's expression grew serious. "Walk with me. There are things we should discuss privately." They moved to a quieter section of the corridor while Lisa and Rivera continued toward their quarters. Zektar's species communicated partially through scent, and Jake could detect the sharp smell that indicated worry. "The weapon restrictions," Zektar said quietly. "You're planning to challenge them again, aren't you?" Jake was surprised. "How did you know?" "Because I know you, my friend. And because there are rumors spreading through the assembly. Some delegates are very concerned about human activities in the outer systems." "What kind of concerns?" Zektar stopped walking and looked around to make sure they were alone. "There was an incident last month. A human merchant vessel intervened in a conflict between the Telvanni government and some refugee groups. The humans didn't ask permission from the local authorities, they just acted." Jake frowned. "I wasn't informed about any incidents." "Because it was covered up. The Telvanni requested that the matter be handled quietly." "But word spreads in the assembly. Many delegates are asking why humans continue to interfere in situations that don't concern them." "People were dying," Jake said. "If humans help refugees, then we did the right thing." "That's exactly what worries them," Zektar replied. "You see, most species in the galaxy follow a simple rule. We take care of our own interests first. We don't risk our lives for strangers. We don't fight battles that aren't ours to fight." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you saying the weapon ban exists because we help people?" "I'm saying that tonight there will be a private meeting of several major delegations. They will be discussing what they call the human problem. And I don't think they're concerned about your weapons." Before Jake could respond, Zektar walked away, leaving him alone in the corridor. Jake stood there for several minutes, thinking about what he had just heard. The weapon ban had always seemed like simple discrimination, but now he wondered if there was something deeper behind it. He made his way to the human quarters, where Lisa and Rivera were unpacking their equipment. Both of them looked up as he entered. "We need to talk," Jake said. "I think we've been asking the wrong questions." "About the weapon ban." Lisa set down her scanner. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe they're not afraid of what we might do with weapons. Maybe they're afraid of what we might do without them." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't make sense, doesn't it?" Jake sat down and looked at both of them. "Think about every human intervention in the last 50 years. Every time we've helped another species, every time we've stood up for the weak, every time we've fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. When was the last time any other species did that?" Lisa and Rivera exchanged glances. Slowly, Lisa began to nod. "Never," she said quietly. "Other species only fight for themselves." "Exactly," Jake said. "And that might be the real reason we're the only species banned from carrying weapons in the Galactic Assembly." Jake Morrison woke up early the next morning with questions burning in his mind. The conversation with Zektar had kept him awake for hours, and he knew he needed answers before the assembly session began. He dressed quickly and made his way to the station's central library, hoping to find some clue about the real reasons behind the weapon ban. The library was enormous, with data storage units reaching up to the ceiling and holographic displays, showing information from thousands of worlds. Jake had been here before, but he had never tried to access the restricted historical archives. Today would be different. He found Dr. Emma Brooks already at one of the research terminals. Emma was a human xenarchaeologist who had spent the last 15 years studying galactic history. She was one of the few humans who had been granted access to some of the older records, though many files remained classified. "Emma," Jake said, as he approached her workstation, "I need your help with something." She looked up from her screen, her eyes tired but curious. "Let me guess. You want to know why humans are treated differently than every other species in the galaxy. How did you know?" "Because I've been researching the same thing for years," Emma replied. "And I think I finally found something interesting." She gestured to her screen, which showed a complex timeline of galactic events. I've been tracking every major conflict in the galaxy for the past 200 years. Do you know what I discovered? Jake sat down next to her. Tell me. The weapon ban wasn't instituted after humans showed aggression. It was instituted after we showed something else entirely. Emma's fingers moved across the control panel, and the display changed to show a star map. This is the Proxima system about 150 years ago. There was a conflict here that most people have forgotten about, but it changed everything. The display zoomed in on a small cluster of planets. The Altarians had established peaceful colonies on 3 worlds in this system. They were farmers, artists, and scientists. They had no military, no weapons, and no enemies. What happened to them? Jake asked. The Draconis Empire decided they wanted the planets. The Altarians had discovered valuable mineral deposits, and the Draconis claimed the system by right of conquest. It was a standard expansion, completely legal under galactic law. Jake frowned. Legal? Oh yes, Emma said bitterly. The galaxy has always operated on a simple principle. The strong take what they want from the weak. When the Draconis attacked the Altarian colonies, the galactic community followed standard protocol, which was formal protests, economic sanctions that nobody enforced, and eventually acceptance of the conquest as natural selection. The Altarians were told to relocate to other worlds or submit to Draconis rule. Emma brought up another display showing diplomatic records from the time. Every major species in the galaxy issued statements of concern. The Zephyrians called it regrettable but inevitable. The Korthic said it was the natural order of things. The Hegemony Coalition offered to help relocate Altarian refugees to less desirable worlds. But humans did something different, Jake said, beginning to understand. Humans did something that had never been done before in recorded galactic history. Emma confirmed. A human fleet captain named Harrison Blake refused to accept the conquest. The display changed to show military records. Blake was commanding a small exploration fleet when he heard about the Altarian situation. He didn't ask permission from Earth, he didn't wait for orders, he just took his ships and headed for the Proxima system. To do what? To fight a war that wasn't his to fight, for people he had never met, in defense of principles that most of the galaxy didn't understand. Emma pulled up combat reports and tactical analyses. Blake's fleet was outnumbered 10-1. The Draconis expected a quick victory, but humans fought differently than anyone had seen before. They used guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, and hit-and-run attacks that confused the enemy. Did they win? They did more than win. They liberated all 3 Altarian colonies in less than 3 months. But that wasn't the shocking part. Jake waited while Emma brought up the final reports from the conflict. The shocking part was what happened after the victory. Blake's fleet could have claimed the planets for humanity. They could have demanded tribute from the Altarians. They could have set up a human colony and taken the mineral wealth for themselves. But they didn't take anything. Blake returned control of the planets to the Altarians, helped them rebuild their defenses, and then left. The humans asked for nothing in return except a promise that the Altarians would help other species in similar situations if they ever could. Emma leaned back in her chair. The galactic community was stunned. No species had ever fought a war for purely moral reasons. No species had ever risked their own lives to protect strangers. No species had ever won a victory and then given it away. Jake felt a chill as he began to understand the implications. What was the reaction? Fear, Emma said simply. Pure, terrified fear. The major powers held emergency sessions to discuss what they called the human problem. They realized that humans had introduced a concept that could destroy the entire galactic order. What concept? The idea that some things are more important than survival. The idea that strong species should protect weak ones instead of conquering them. The idea that moral principles could be worth fighting for. Emma brought up the final document, a classified report from the Galactic Security Council. This is where the weapon ban was first proposed. Look at the reasoning they gave. Jake, read the text on the screen. Human military doctrine appears. to be based on principles of intervention and protection that are unprecedented in galactic history. Their willingness to engage in combat for non-territorial, non-resource-based objectives poses a potential threat to established political structures. They weren't afraid of human aggression, Emma explained. They were afraid of human compassion. They realized that if humans were allowed to carry weapons in the assembly, they might use them to defend other species against their own governments. How many other interventions have there been since then? Emma's expression grew grim. 23 documented cases. Humans have intervened in conflicts on behalf of weaker species 23 times in the last century and a half. We've never conquered a world, never enslaved a population, never demanded tribute from those we've saved. And every time the galactic community has responded with more restrictions on human activities. Exactly, the weapon ban was just the beginning. Trade restrictions, diplomatic limitations, monitoring requirements, all designed to prevent humans from disrupting what they call the natural order. Jake stood up and walked to the window overlooking the station's main corridor. He could see delegates from dozens of species moving about their business, but now he saw them differently. They weren't just representatives of different worlds. They were representatives of a system that feared the very idea of moral courage. "Emma," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk to some of these delegates. I think we need to understand exactly what they're afraid of. Be careful, Jake. Some truths are dangerous to know." "Maybe, but some truths are more dangerous to ignore." Jake left the library with a new understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. The weapon ban wasn't discrimination. It wasn't prejudice. It was a desperate attempt to contain something that threatened the foundation of galactic civilization. The question now was what humanity would do with this knowledge, and whether the galaxy was ready for the answer. Jake Morrison spent the rest of the morning thinking about what Emma had told him. The truth about the weapon ban was more disturbing than he had imagined, but he needed to understand the full scope of what humanity was facing. He decided to do something that few human ambassadors had ever attempted. He would interview representatives from other species about their views on conflict and war. His first stop was the Zephyrian delegation quarters. Ambassador Krillax was a veteran diplomat who had served in the assembly for over 20 years. Jake found him in the meditation chamber that all Zephyrian ships maintained for spiritual purposes. "Ambassador Morrison," Krillax said without opening his eyes, "I wondered when you would come to ask your questions." Jake sat down across from the insect-like alien. "You know why I'm here? Word travels quickly in the assembly. You have been researching human military history. You want to understand why your species is treated differently. Can you help me understand?" Krillax finally opened his large compound eyes. "Tell me, Ambassador. When your species encounters a conflict between two other groups, what is your first instinct?" Jake thought about the question. "To help the side that's being wronged, and there is your answer," Krillax said simply. "When my species encounters such a conflict, our first instinct is to determine which side offers us the most benefit. When the Korthek encounter it, they ask which side is stronger. When the Draconis encounter it, they ask which side they can conquer more easily. But what about justice? What about protecting the innocent?" Krillax's antennae twitched in what Jake had learned was confusion. These are human concepts. Most species do not think in such terms. We think in terms of survival, advantage, and natural selection. Jake left the Zephyrian quarters with a growing sense of unease. He made his way to the Korthek delegation, where he found General Vexenor reviewing battle reports from border conflicts. "Human," Vexenor said without looking up. "You smell of questions and confusion." "I'm trying to understand something," Jake said. "When your species goes to war, what do you fight for? Territory, resources, breeding rights?" "The elimination of threats to our hive." Vexenor's mechanical voice showed no emotion. "We fight to make our species stronger and our enemies weaker. Do you ever fight to protect other species?" Vexenor finally looked at Jake, his red eyes glowing in the dim light. "Why would we risk our lives for creatures that are not of our hive? If they cannot protect themselves, they deserve to die." This is the natural order, but what if they're innocent? What if they've done nothing wrong? Innocence is a luxury for the strong, Vexner replied. The weak die regardless of their moral standing. This has always been true. Jake's next stop was the Hegemony Coalition quarters, where he found Ambassador Zektar waiting for him. You look troubled, my friend, Zektar said as Jake entered. I'm beginning to understand something terrible, Jake replied. I've been talking to other delegations about their views on war and conflict. Every species I've spoken to follows the same basic principle, which is they only fight for themselves. They only protect their own interests. The idea of risking your life to help strangers is completely foreign to them, Zektar nodded slowly. This is why the private meeting is happening tonight. The major powers are concerned about what they call human interference in natural processes. Natural processes? The strong conquering the weak. The dominant species eliminating the subordinate ones. The natural cycle of galactic evolution. Zektar's expression grew serious. Your species disrupts this cycle. Jake felt sick. Are you saying the galaxy operates on the principle that might makes right? I am saying that until humans arrived, every species in the galaxy accepted this principle as natural law. When the Draconis conquered the Altarians, it was seen as inevitable. When the Telvanni eliminated the Kef minority, it was viewed as unfortunate but necessary. When the Zephyrians absorbed the Centauri colonies, it was considered progress. But humans changed that. Humans introduced the concept of moral intervention. The idea that strong species should protect weak ones instead of conquering them. The idea that some things are worth fighting for even if they don't benefit your own people. Jake stood up and walked to the window. And that terrifies them. More than you can imagine, Zektar confirmed. Because if that idea spreads, it could destroy the entire foundation of galactic civilization. That evening, Jake met with Dr. Kevin Walsh, the human behavioral psychologist who had been studying alien cultures for the past decade. Kevin had been quiet during most of the diplomatic mission, but Jake realized he might have insights that could help explain what was happening. Kevin, Jake said as they walked through one of the station's observation decks, I need to understand something about human psychology. What makes us different from other species? Kevin looked out at the stars before answering. We're the only species that has developed what we call moral empathy. Most aliens can understand empathy within their own group, but humans extend it to strangers. Explain that. Every other species I've studied has the same basic programming. Protect your own group, compete with other groups, eliminate threats to your survival. It's a successful evolutionary strategy that has worked for millions of years. But humans develop something different. We develop the ability to see ourselves in others, even others who are completely different from us. We can imagine their suffering and feel compelled to help them. Jake thought about this. So, when we see a weak species being attacked by a strong one, we identify with the victims. Exactly. And we feel morally obligated to help them, even if it costs us nothing and gains us nothing. Most other species literally cannot understand this motivation. Is that why they fear us? Kevin nodded. They fear us because our moral system is incompatible with their survival system. If human values became widespread, it would mean the end of conquest, the end of the strong dominating the weak, the end of the natural order as they understand it. So the weapon ban exists to prevent us from acting on our moral impulses. The weapon ban exists to prevent you from being able to defend others when your moral impulses demand it. Without weapons, you can disapprove of genocide, but you can't stop it. You can protest conquest, but you can't prevent it. Jake felt a chill as he realized the full scope of what humanity was facing. They're not just afraid of our weapons. They're afraid of our willingness to use them for others instead of ourselves. And they should be afraid, Kevin said quietly. Because if humans ever decide that the galactic order is morally unacceptable, we have the power to change it. Even against the combined forces of 46 other species? Especially against them. Because we're the only species that would fight to the death for principles instead of just survival. And that makes us more dangerous than any weapon. Jake returned to his quarters that night with a new understanding of humanity's position in the galaxy. The weapon ban wasn't discrimination. It was a desperate attempt to contain the most dangerous force in the universe, a species that believed some things were worth dying for, even if those things didn't benefit them personally. The question now was what humanity would do with this knowledge. Jake Morrison was preparing for the morning assembly session when the emergency alert came through. Red lights flashed throughout the human quarters as Lisa Carter rushed into his room with a data pad in her hands. "Jake, we have a problem," she said, her face pale. "There's a situation developing in the Telvanni system." Jake took the pad and read the incoming reports. The Telvanni government had announced what they called a population redistribution program. They claimed that resource shortages on their homeworld required difficult decisions about which populations could be supported. Population redistribution, Jake said grimly. "That's a nice way of saying genocide." Lisa nodded. "The Telvanni are targeting the Kef minority. They say the Kef consume too many resources and contribute too little to society. They're giving them 72 hours to evacuate the planet or face elimination." Jake scrolled through more details. The Kef were a small, peaceful species that had lived on Telvanni worlds for generations. They were farmers and artisans who had never posed a threat to anyone. Their only crime was being smaller and weaker than their Telvanni neighbors. "How many Kef are we talking about?" Jake asked. "About 3 million scattered across 4 planets. In the system, most of them don't have ships or the resources to evacuate on their own." Jake walked to his window and looked out at the assembly station. In a few hours, delegates from 47 species would gather to discuss this crisis. He already knew what the response would be. The assembly session began with the Telvanni ambassador explaining their government's position. Ambassador Sekelin stood at the central podium with the confidence of someone who knew the law was on his side. "The Telvanni government faces difficult choices due to environmental pressures," Sekelin announced. "Our planets can no longer support all current populations. We have determined that voluntary relocation of non-essential populations is the most efficient solution." Jake listened with growing anger as the Telvanni ambassador described the Kef as non-essential. He used words like optimization and resource management, but everyone in the room knew what he was really talking about. When Sekelin finished his presentation, the responses from other delegations were predictable. The Zephyrian representative expressed concern but noted that this was an internal Telvanni matter. The Korthic delegate mentioned natural selection and survival of the fittest. The Draconis ambassador suggested that the Kef could find new homes in less desirable systems. Finally, it was Jake's turn to speak. He stood at the human delegation's position and looked around the room at the assembled representatives. "The Telvanni government is planning to commit genocide," he said simply. "They are going to murder 3 million innocent people because those people are inconvenient. And everyone in this room is going to let it happen." A murmur of disapproval went through the assembly. The Hegemony Coalition representative stood up. "Ambassador Morrison, you are making inflammatory accusations. The Telvanni have a right to manage their own planetary resources. Do they have a right to murder civilians?" Jake asked. "They have a right to make difficult decisions about population sustainability," came the reply. Jake felt sick as he listened to delegate after delegate defend the indefensible. They used careful language and diplomatic terms, but the message was clear. The Kef were going to die, and the galactic community was going to watch it happen. During the lunch break, Jake met with Tony Mitchell, the human trade negotiator who had been monitoring communications from the Telvanni system. Tony's expression was grim as he showed Jake the latest reports. "It's worse than we thought," Tony said. "I've been tracking evacuation requests from various corporations. Several species have been quietly asked to provide transport ships." "For the Kef?" "For species that other galactic powers consider strategically valuable. The Altarians are getting evacuation assistance because the Zephyrians want to maintain good relations with them. The Centauri are being helped because they have mineral resources that the Korthic need. What about the Kef?" "Nobody wants them. They're small, they have no military, They control no strategic resources, and they can't offer anything in return for help. So they're going to be left behind. Jake stared at the reports in horror. They're being abandoned because they're not useful enough to save. That's how the galaxy works, Jake. Species survive based on their strategic value, not their right to exist. That evening, Jake received an encrypted message on his personal communicator. The signal came from Captain Rachel Stone, a human special forces officer who was supposed to be on leave. The message was short but clear. Small fleet positioned near Telvanni system. Can extract civilians if authorization is given. Estimate 72 hours before Telvanni military begins elimination protocols, awaiting orders. Jake stared at the message for a long time. Rachel Stone was operating without official authorization, but she had positioned human ships near the crisis zone. She was offering to evacuate the KEF, but it would mean fighting the Telvanni military forces. Jake made his way to Commander Rivera's quarters, where he found the veteran officer reviewing tactical reports from the Telvanni system. "Alex," Jake said as he entered. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." Rivera looked up from his screens. "What is it?" "If I asked you to authorize a rescue mission to save the KEF, would you do it?" Rivera was quiet for a long moment. "Jake, that would mean going to war with the Telvanni. It would mean violating galactic law. It would mean risking human lives for people we've never met." "I know what it would mean. I'm asking if you would." "Do it." Rivera stood up and walked to his window. "When I joined the Human Space Service, I took an oath to protect and defend. I thought that meant protecting human interests. But after spending years out here, watching the galaxy operate, I've started to wonder if that oath means something bigger." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe protecting and defending isn't just about humans. Maybe it's about protecting and defending?" "What's right?" Rivera turned back to Jake. "If you give the order, I'll support it. But you need to understand what it will cost us. The galactic community will never forgive us for this. We'll be completely isolated. We'll face economic sanctions, military threats, and possible coordinated attacks." Jake thought about everything he had learned over the past few days. The weapon ban, the fear of human moral intervention, the galaxy's acceptance of genocide as natural law. Then he thought about 3 million innocent people who were going to die because nobody considered them worth saving. "Alex," he said quietly, "send a message to Captain Stone. Tell her to prepare for civilian extraction operations." "Jake, are you sure about this?" "I'm sure that I can't live with myself if we do nothing. I'm sure that some things are more important than diplomatic relations. And I'm sure that if we don't act, nobody else will." Rivera nodded and moved to his communications console. "I'll send the message. But Jake, once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be at war with the entire galactic order. Then maybe it's time for the galactic order to change." As Rivera sent the authorization to Captain Stone, Jake realized that humanity was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. They were about to prove that the galaxy's fears about human moral intervention were completely justified, and they were about to discover whether doing the right thing was worth losing everything else. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly was called 12 hours after Jake Morrison authorized the rescue mission. He sat in the human delegation area watching as representatives from 46 other species filed into the chamber with expressions ranging from anger to fear. The news from the Telvanni system had spread quickly throughout the station. Ambassador Seklin of the Telvanni was the first to speak, his voice shaking with rage. "The human fleet has committed an act of war against the sovereign government of Telvanni. They have attacked our defense forces and are actively interfering in our internal affairs." Jake looked around the room and saw the faces of beings he had worked with for years. Some looked disappointed, others looked frightened, but none looked surprised. They had always known this day would come. The Hegemony Coalition representative stood next. "We demand an immediate explanation from the human delegation. By what authority do humans interfere in conflicts that do not concern them?" Jake rose slowly from his seat. The chamber fell silent as he walked to the central podium. He had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, he found himself speaking from his heart, rather than from any script. By the authority of conscience, he said simply. By the authority of beings who believe that some things are more important than law, more important than politics, and more important than our own safety. The Zephyrian ambassador's antennae twitched with agitation. You speak of conscience, as if it grants you the right to violate galactic sovereignty. The Telvanni have the legal right to manage their planetary populations. The Telvanni have the legal right to commit genocide, Jake replied. And apparently the rest of you have the legal right to watch it happen? But humans have something that supersedes legal rights. We have moral obligations. A communication screen at the front of the chamber flickered to life, showing real-time footage from the Telvanni system. Captain Rachel Stone's voice came through the speakers as the assembly watched human ships evacuating Kef civilians under fire from Telvanni defense forces. This is Captain Stone of the Human Rescue Fleet. We are currently extracting approximately 50,000 civilians from the surface of Telvanni Prime. Telvanni forces are actively targeting civilian evacuation sites. We are returning fire to protect the innocent. The footage showed human soldiers forming defensive perimeters around Kef families as they boarded transport ships. Jake watched as young humans risked their lives to carry Kef children to safety, knowing that each act of heroism was being broadcast to the entire galaxy. Commander Ryan Bell's voice joined the transmission. Total evacuation progress stands at 800,000 civilians rescued across 3 planets. Estimated completion time is 18 hours if current resistance levels are maintained. The Korthek representative slammed a mechanical fist on his desk. This is intolerable. Humans are disrupting the natural order. The weak are meant to be eliminated by the strong. This is how species evolve and improve. Then maybe it's time for a new kind of evolution, Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. Maybe it's time for species to evolve beyond the need to destroy each other. President Martha Davis appeared on another communication screen from Earth. Her weathered face showed the strain of making decisions that would affect humanity's future in the galaxy. Members of the Galactic Assembly, she said formally. I am speaking as the elected representative of the United Human Colonies. The rescue operation in the Telvanni system has been authorized by our government and reflects the fundamental values of our species, the Draconis ambassador interrupted. Your values are incompatible with galactic civilization. You cannot impose human morality on the rest of the universe. We're not imposing anything, President Davis replied. We're simply refusing to stand by while innocents are murdered. If that makes us incompatible with galactic civilization, then perhaps galactic civilization needs to examine its own values. The debate continued for hours, but Jake knew the outcome was inevitable. When the vote was finally called, it was 46-1 in favor of sanctions against humanity. The measures were severe: complete trade embargo, expulsion from the assembly, prohibition on human military activities outside their own territory, and authorization from member species to use force against human vessels that violated the new restrictions. As the vote was announced, Jake received a final transmission from the Telvanni system. Elder Kefon, speaking for the survivors, appeared on the main screen. The small, gentle creature's voice was barely above a whisper, but every word carried throughout the chamber. We are the last of the Kef from the Telvanni worlds, he said. Slowly, 3.2 million of our people have been saved by humans who had never met us, who gained nothing from helping us, who risked everything to protect strangers. We have learned that there is one species in this galaxy that will fight for others, that will die for principles, and that will sacrifice for beings they do not even know. The elder's large eyes looked directly into the camera. We have learned that there is one species that believes some things are worth more than survival, more valuable than profit, more important than power. We have learned that there is one species that carries weapons not to conquer, but to protect. The transmission ended, leaving the assembly in uncomfortable silence. Jake looked around the room one final time at the representatives of species that had chosen politics over principles, law over justice and survival over morality. You want to know why humans are the only species banned from carrying weapons in this assembly? He said quietly. It's because we're the only species that consistently uses our weapons to defend others instead of ourselves. It's because we're the only species that fights for what's right instead of what's profitable. Jake gathered his papers and prepared to leave. You fear human weapons because you know we won't use them to conquer you. We'll use them to free the people you oppress, to protect the species you destroy, and to defend the principles you've abandoned. As the human delegation prepared to depart Concordia Prime for the last time, Jake met with Ambassador Zektar in a private corridor. The old alien's expression was sad but not surprised. You knew this would happen, Jake said. I knew that eventually. Humans would have to choose between being accepted and being human, Zektar replied. I also knew which choice you would make. Was it worth it? Zektar looked toward the viewport where human ships could be seen departing with their cargo of Kef refugees. Ask me in 50 years when those children grow up free instead of dead. The journey back to Earth was quiet, but Jake found himself thinking about the messages that had begun arriving from across the galaxy. They were encrypted communications from small species, minority populations, and oppressed groups on dozens of worlds. The messages were simple but consistent. If humans ever decided to fight the Galactic Order, they would not fight alone. 6 months later, Jake stood in his office on Earth reading reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy. Despite the sanctions, despite the isolation, despite the constant threat of attack, humanity was growing stronger. The Kef refugees had integrated into human society, bringing new knowledge and perspectives. Other small species had begun quietly requesting permission to relocate to human-protected worlds. Most importantly, something had changed in the galaxy itself. For the first time in recorded history, some species were beginning to question whether might really did make right. The idea that strong species should protect weak ones instead of conquering them was spreading. Slowly but inevitably, through the galactic community, Jake understood now why humans were banned from carrying weapons in the Galactic Assembly. It wasn't because they were dangerous to individuals. It was because they were dangerous to the entire system of galactic civilization as it existed, and maybe, he thought as he watched human and Kef children playing together in the gardens outside his window, that was exactly what the galaxy needed.